righty. Well, let's get this show on the road. Coming at you live from FEMA Region 8 in the heart of the Centennial State. My name is Will Stroh, Customer Support Engineer at Qumulo. I am joined today by my friend and cohort, Fil Pereira. And without further ado, let's let the merry go round and talk what's new with Q. There's a lot of unfortunate rhymes in that sentence there. So today we'll be running over 6301 to 701. And if I can click of the mouse, that will kick over that way.
Yep. So with 6.3.x platform upgrade, for those who aren't already aware, platform upgrade means that we will need to conduct either a complete reboot of the cluster or a rolling reboot of the cluster to apply this version. Some of the key features in this version are KMS encryption, SMB support for offline storage attribute, transparent platform refresh 6.3.1.1 plus, and we'll go into that, as well as static IP changes.
Thank you, Phil. Alrighty. So KMS encryption, one of those things that if you don't know what any of this means on this slide, you're probably not using it, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. But for the security conscious and security minded, with 6.3.0, we did have the ability to do at-rest encryption in there with your external key management server if you happen to have one. For the specifics for your security team, you can see them on the screen there, KMIP 1.0 and this Trust Manager 2.11. This is all handled through the CLI. So we do have there's a typo there. It should be encryption, not encryptions. Set key store KMS. So I'll fix that before it goes to print. But that's how you would interact with that. It is not in the GUI.
Up next, we added the SMB support for the extended attribute adder_offline. This is not to be confused with SMB offline files. This is an attribute that can be set by external applications. Most of the time, backup applications to indicate that a file has been moved to offline storage. So previous to 6.3, we did not have this extended attribute available, and now it is available with 6.3 plus.
Okie dokies. Transparent platform refresh. Big fancy name. We introduced this actually a couple versions ago, and as things rolled along, we discovered some features that would raise our ugly head. So now, if you happen to be on any of these platforms out here, the K144C versions of those, or that Super Micro Monster with a really long name, we do require you to be on 6311 before moving down the TPR road. Now, for those of you not familiar, the transparent platform refresh is where you will buy new nodes, and we will basically move your data from your existing nodes over to those new ones, so you can no longer have to worry about doing what we love to call in the storage realm of the older years as the forklift migrations, where you bring in some new stuff on pallets and spend weeks on end moving things over. This happens all in the background. Again, we do just want you to be on 6311 or higher due to drive types that are out there. Some of you may have been privy to updating drive firmware on these drives. It's a straightforward operation. If you have any concerns, please, by all means, reach out to your Slack channel. If you don't have a Slack channel, reach out to your CSM. If you don't know who your CSM is, shoot a flare up. It'll make a big Qumulo symbol. The grump quat will be in the sky. We will see that and reach out to you and walk you through all the steps we need to do there. Once the TPR finishes, there is a slight change. Historically, it would power down the nodes. Now we go ahead and keep them online. There's a couple different reasons for this, but the biggest one is a lot of customers will be going through this or have gone through this, and afterwards they want to wipe the systems, for example. Dealing with a customer right now who has to go through and do a Department of Defense wipe against all the data that was on those over there. So it's easier across the board for them just to simply keep things up and running out there. You will be greeted, if you were to log into one of these nodes, you will be greeted to one of those signs that has a little grump quats, either fishing or standing on a ball, saying this node is not part of a cluster. What do you want to do with it? Lastly, and Phil will talk about this on the next slide as well, but IP assignment remains unchanged. So if you happen to have nodes 1 through 4 and you're doing a TPR, you're adding 4 nodes in there, and if your IP assignment was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, and 4 will now be that stays with those 4 nodes. It doesn't automatically move over to the new ones. But as I said, I'm getting ahead of myself, and I will let Phil speak to that.
Thanks, Will. So static IP changes. So coming off that, and not only does that change in TPR, it also changes generically across the cluster. So with 6.3.x plus, whenever you change the IP assignment in the WebUI or CLI, we will no longer reshuffle IPs across the nodes. In that before, if you had nodes 1 through 4, added some new nodes and changed the IP assignment to include an IP that was lower than was previously there, the node persistent IPs and floating IPs would kind of all reshuffle. Mostly this applies to the persistent IPs. They'd reshuffle where the lowest numbered node would get the lowest new IP that's been assigned. In this case, with these changes now, the nodes will maintain their static IPs, and any new nodes that get added in will acquire the lower IPs that may have been added to that range. So overall, the changes here is that the static IPs that are currently assigned to your nodes will not reshuffle if you change the IP ranges, provided that you still include the existing IPs that were there present.
So you're saying static IPs are actually static now?
They are actually static. So the persistent IP, as we name it, is persistent to that node as of 6.3x going forward.
It only took 6 years of releases. All right, so that wraps up really the changes in 6.3. Not terribly earth-shattering, but they are good things to have out there. I would say from that list, probably the TPR changes are the biggest ones to be aware of. There are platforms that are going end of life in the next couple of years, so it would be something to keep in mind if you are looking to migrate things along there. Now, that said, in the next couple of years, ideally, you're still not on 6.3.1.1. You should be on something much higher. But I do have a favorite customer that's still on 2.13. So take that for what it is. Moving forward, with our 7.0 releases, we have small random write performance increases. That's a lot of words that Phil's going to talk about that are going to make everyone on this call happy. Additionally, we have custom metadata tags you can throw out there, some snapshot changes, and rolling reboot changes.
So small random write performance. So we made some significant improvements to small random write performance over SMB in 7.0.0.1, and then included those changes in NFS v3 and 7.0.1.1. The way this works is it merges multiple writes queued for the same file into a single transaction, and the writes don't have to be contiguous. So before, if you had a workflow like FSLogix, which is a perfect candidate for this type of improvement, what would happen was the FSLogix would open a VHX file for the user's profile, and as the user's working away, it would create a lot of small random writes across that VHX file. And each write would come across as one independent write. And if you imagine small sub 1K writes, it would create a lot. So now we'll recognize that these writes are all destined for the same file, and we'll merge them together and queue them, and then do one big large batch write. So that increases the performance dramatically. So like I said, FSLogix, perfect candidate for this workflow. Any other workflow where you have a lot of small random writes going to the same file will have a huge performance improvement with 7.0 plus.
And again, just keep in mind those versions on that. With SMB, I realize there's the same 3 numbers there repeated multiple times. SMB is 7.0.1 and NFS is 7.0.1.1. All right, metadata tags. You can use these for any of the stuff you're storing up in the cloud. If you haven't ventured into the cloud yet, I highly recommend you talk to our Azure sales team, and they'll be happy to get you set up with a free subscription out there for testing purposes. All of this comes over via the command line. You can see the command there without typos, unlike the other one, the QQFS set user metadata command. And this stuff will replicate up to your S3, like I said. And honestly, if you want to have pictures of llamas, you want to throw a metadata tag of llama on there, you can go to town on that one. Why you would be having a lot of pictures of llamas, I leave that up to you at the end of the day.
Next up, we had some snapshot policy changes. So snapshots made by a policy will now start within their configured snapshot interval. Previously, snapshots would be taken immediately after enabling, leading to a possibility of missed snapshots when the interval didn't divide into 24 hours, such as 5-hour snapshot intervals. Basically, this means, if you had a snapshot policy configured where it was configured to take a snapshot between a certain time, let's say noon and 5 p.m., and you had it set for 5-hour intervals. You created that snapshot starting at, let's say, 11 a.m. It would wait. At noon, it would take the first snapshot. At 5 p.m., it would take the next snapshot because that falls within the 5-hour interval window, and it would keep calculating 5 hours after that. 5 doesn't divide into 24 nicely, so the next day comes around and your first snapshot that happens within your interval would fall at 1 p.m. So then within your 5-hour window where you would expect it to take 2 snapshots, one at the beginning, one at the end, you actually get 1 snapshot only within that window, because after your 1 p.m. snapshot hits, the next 5 hours is 6 p.m. and that's outside your window, so it wouldn't take. So we've changed those policy snapshot intervals around, so now they actually calculate to fall within the snapshot interval window and no longer have the chance of falling outside that window, leading to missed snapshots.
Now, Phil, I was an economics major in college. We would have made that 24 divisible into 5. We would just ask you what number you wanted.
Yeah, what do you want it to be, right?
Exactly.
Well, what do you want the numbers to be? We'll make it work.
And explains my financial situation these days. Moving along to rolling reboots. We did some changes here. So I want to say it was a couple versions ago. We introduced the possibility of doing rolling reboots. And what you would see happen in those cases is if you had a fault tolerance that allowed you to have, say, 2 nodes offline, we would go off and take 2 nodes offline during a rolling reboot. For various reasons, some customers did not care for this. They would prefer not to be at a situation where if I have 2 nodes offline and my fault tolerance is now at the end of its tolerance, if you will, and if I were to have a dry fail or another node go offline, then I got some serious problems going on there. So with 7011, we will do N-1 nodes allowed by fault tolerance. So if you have 2 nodes fault tolerance, we'll only take 1 offline. If you have 3, we take 2, etc. If that still concerns you, you can certainly do the upgrade via the command line and the rolling reboot portion there. You'd simply use that num nodes to reboot flag to the upgrade cluster. So if you are one of our customers who likes to do things via the command line, that option is out there and available for you. From the GUI, you are at the sake of whatever the system deems you have as far as configured fault tolerance at that point. But if you want full control over it, certainly by all means, you can do it through the CLI there. Alrighty. Well, as I was telling the customer the other day, this is going to be short and sweet and to the point. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them out there. I don't see anything in the chat right now, so I'll give it a few. Otherwise, while we're waiting on those to come in, next month, if you'd like to join us for these again, we are celebrating my birthday, so I expect lots of accolades and presents. But we'll also be diving into replication best practices. And so if you do have a situation where you have multiple clusters, you are doing replication between them, maybe you have it set up right, which you would if you would have talked to me in advance, or maybe you have questions about it. We will get those addressed, certainly. If you have yet to have a secondary cluster out there, maybe this will tickle your fancy to throw one up there. Again, I highly recommend talking to our cloud sales team. and they'll be happy to set you up with a cloud cluster. All right. Well, I still don't see any questions out there, so my pausing of talking can only go on for so long.
Oh, we
So
got a question.
Oh, we do.
Yep.
Hot dog.
So we got a couple coming in from anonymous attendee. Good morning. Any plan on adding scheduler to copy from S3 feature? So just to confirm, this is so that you can schedule your copy to S3 feature and not be the one button click. Perfect. So I'd have to check with the PM team on that. I know that they're looking at some other enhancements to the copy to S3 feature that they have on the roadmap, but nothing assigned yet. I know one of them is in terms of changing the keys without having to recreate a job, something along those lines, but I'm not sure if there's anything currently planned for adding additional functionality in terms of making it into a schedule as opposed to just a click to replicate. But we can definitely look into that. If we knew which customer you were, feel free to let Adelpho know on the call in the private chat if you'd like, and we can always follow up with you and let you know.
All righty, I'm going to jump down to the node tolerance one. Let Phil handle the cloud one. If my node failure tolerance is set to 1, which a lot of clusters are, will the rolling reboots continue to still take down one node at a time? Yes, they will, because you still have to take one off there at that point. There's no two ways around that, unfortunately. Your other option would be to do a full reboot of all nodes at once. If you can take the outage, it certainly quickens things up. When nodes go offline for a rolling reboot, they do have to go through that post process. Typically, we tell customers it can take upwards of 10 minutes. Honestly, it's usually quicker than that, but that's what we usually plan for. 10 minutes per node in that case. And once the node comes back online, we do have to go through a restriper process. So that's going to be dependent upon how much data was coming in while the node was in a reboot state. Most of the time, that finishes before you even can type the command out there, and it rolls on to the next one. You're good to go. From personal experience, I have seen it where it takes, an hour, hour and a half, simply because they had a lot of stuff coming in. It was a streaming TV station, if you must know. So in those cases, if you can take the outage, it's obviously quicker. But if you got to go the rolling reboot route, yes, it will take one node offline if you have only one node fault tolerance.
From Chris, we have a question. Cloud cluster is free, right? So if you want to hop on over to the Azure native Qumulo option in the Azure Marketplace, you can start a trial with an Azure cluster and kick the tires with it and hammer away at it and see if it would work for your environment, which I'm sure it would. It's the exact same software stack, just running on Azure. But once your trial is up, unfortunately, in order to keep us all employed, you will have to pay for your usage. Luckily, though, ANQ, or Azure Native Qumulo, is pay as you use. So if you only use X number of terabytes, you're only going to pay for that X number of terabytes and not for any excess space you haven't used.
Cool. I like the sound of free.
Free trial.
All right. Well, okay. Semantics. When will snapshot locking config files, keys, and such be fully in the GUI? That's a real darn good question there, Mr. Stephen Ruby. I don't have an answer to that. Typically, the way Qumulo works, and the product management team is going to get all upset for me for spilling the tea here. Typically, the way things work is we will introduce them in the CLI first, and then a couple releases later, it'll show up magically in the GUI. Whether or not that's going to happen here, I do not know. I can certainly raise it to the PM team and then find out for you and drop you a line out there. As far as that's concerned, timeline-wise, typically it's about 2 releases later, it'll show up in the GUI. So depending on when snapshot locking came into play, I want to say it was an early 6 release. Ideally, if that holds, that would be the next release or two. But again, I don't have a straight answer on that one, unfortunately. So anything I tell you is probably lies and fabrications at this point. But I will hunt that down and let you know. All right, folks, you have a good one. If you have any questions, by all means, please feel free to reach out in your Slack channels. And we'll see you next month for replication best practices. Take care, guys.
Thanks, everyone.